You ever notice how the entertainment industry has a short memory? 1 week a story is everywhere. The next, gone. Buried under the next big thing, the next celebrity, the next distraction. But some of these stories, they don't get buried because they weren't important. They got buried because they were too important, too uncomfortable, and too damaging to the people involved. Today we're pulling out 5 of them, 5 scandals that were once massive that should be talked about, but somehow got swept under the rug. Here are 5 dark entertainment stories no one talks about. Explain. Rick James, the kidnapping no one talks about. Most people know Rick James in one of two ways. Either they know him as a genius behind Super Freak, one of the most sampled songs in music history, or they know him from a Dave Chappelle sketch where Charlie Murphy calls him a habitual line stepper. And look, both of those things are very much true. Rick James was a funk pioneer. He was magnetic, he was charismatic, and he was one of the most original artists of his generation. But there is a third version of Rick James that most people seem to conveniently forget about. And that version is a convicted kidnapper and torturer who served time in Folsom State Prison and got out to a world that incredibly was most ready to forgive him. Let's talk about that version. By the early 1990s, Rick James was deep in crack cocaine addiction that was consuming his life and career. His mainstream success had peaked years earlier. He was spending, by his own admission, $7,000 a week on drugs. And in July 1991, that addiction led to one of the most disturbing incidents in music history. Rick James and his 21-year-old girlfriend, Tanya Hijazi, met a 24-year-old woman named Frances Alley at a party at his Hollywood Hills home. She was unemployed, and they invited her to stay with them. What followed was 6 days of horror that most people have never heard about. James accused Alley of stealing his drugs. He threatened her with a gun and told her if she tried to leave, he would kill her. Then, with Hijazi's assistance, he tied her to a chair. Over the next several days, while smoking crack cocaine, they burned her body with the hot end of their crack pipe over 20 times, leaving severe burns across her legs and abdomen. They also forced her to perform sexual acts. They forced her to smoke crack against her will. When James finally untied her, she fled and checked into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Her injuries spoke for themselves. The police were notified, and James was arrested on August 2nd, 1991. Here's where the story goes from shocking to unbelievable. While out on bail, the Frances Alley case, while he was literally awaiting trial for kidnapping and torture, Rick James did it again. In November 1992, James and Hijazi met music executive Mary Sauger at the Sunset Tower Hotel in West Hollywood under the pretenses of a business meeting. According to Sauger, they kidnapped her and held her captive for 20 hours, beating her repeatedly throughout. She described the cycle of being beaten until she lost consciousness, then being revived with water, and then beaten again. During the trial, while Sauger was on the stand recounting of what happened to her, Rick James fell asleep in his chair and began to snore audibly in the courtroom. That detail right there tells you everything you need to know about where his head was. James faced the maximum sentence of life in prison if convicted on all charges: assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated mayhem, torture, forcible oral copulation, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. He was found guilty on multiple counts, but was cleared of the torture charge, which was the one that carried an automatic life sentence. He was sentenced to 5 years at Folsom State Prison, but only served 2. Released in 1996 after the prosecution was found to have committed misconduct during the trial. He came home. He got married to Tanya Hijazi, the same girlfriend who had been convicted alongside him. He released music. He gave interviews, and the world mostly shrugged. His catalog kept selling. His legend kept growing. And by the time the Chappelle Show's sketch aired in 2003, Rick James was a punchline, not a convicted kidnapper who had tortured 2 women while on crack cocaine. Frances Alley and Mary Sauger are real women who went through something real, and the fact that the dominant cultural memory of Rick James is a comedy sketch rather than what he actually did to 2 women is a failure on how we process celebrity wrongdoing. His music was great, but he did horrible things. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The women he hurt deserve us to at least remember what happened. Rick James and Tanya divorced in 2002, and just 2 years later, on August 6, 2004, Rick James was found dead in his Los Angeles home at just 56 years old. The official cause of death was acute cardiac dysfunction and an enlarged heart with 9 drugs in his system, including cocaine and methamphetamine. The coroner ruled it an accident. His memoir Glow reads like evidence in a trial no one was ready for, submitted by a man who absolutely had no business putting any of this in writing and did it anyway with zero remorse. The drug use, the violence, the women, and there's some things that made us stop, close the laptop, and go outside for some air. And let's just say, it's about animals. And as for Tanya, life after Rick James took some wild turns of its own. She went on to work as a fashion and costume designer, largely staying out of the spotlight. And then in 2021, news broke that she was engaged, and here's where it gets really interesting. Her fiancé was Darius McCrary, the artist best known for Eddie Winslow on Family Matters. And here's the kicker. Darius had previously said that Rick James was his godfather. So she went on from Rick James to Rick James's godson. That's not a rebound, that's a whole different level of something. The relationship didn't end quietly either. McCrary was eventually granted a 4-year restraining order against Tanya by a Los Angeles Superior Court judge, with accusations flying on both sides. And honestly, looking back at everything, the assaults, the prison time, the memoir, the animals we didn't want to name, you have to wonder if the Chappelle skit did Rick James a little too much justice. It made him cool again. It made him funny. It gave him a second life in pop culture that maybe, just maybe, he didn't deserve. Charlie Murphy was out here trying to warn us, and we all just laughed. Jackie Coogan, the child star who changed the law. Before Macaulay Culkin, before Gary Coleman, before Shirley Temple even, there was Jackie Coogan. And if you never heard that name, that's kind of the whole point of this story. Jackie Coogan was born in 1914 in Los Angeles into a show business family. He started performing as a toddler. At age 6, he was casted along Charlie Chaplin in a 1921 silent film, The Kid, one of the most celebrated films of the silent era. The movie was a massive hit. Jackie Coogan became one of the most famous children on the planet. Chaplin himself said Jackie was one of the most instinctively talented performers he had ever worked with. Between his debut and his teenage years, Jackie Coogan starred in 19 silent films. He toured the world. He was mobbed by fans. He was invited to meet kings and presidents. At his peak, in the early 1920s, he was earning roughly $1 million per year, making him one of the highest paid performers of all of Hollywood. And by the time his childhood career wound down, he earned an estimated $4 million. $4 million in the 1920s? That's equivalent to around $93 million in 2025. That is a staggering amount of money. Jackie Coogan was set for life many times over. Except he wasn't. Here's what Jackie Coogan didn't know the whole time he was out there earning millions. Under California law at that time, a child's earnings legally belonged to their parents, not to the child, to the parents. Every dollar Jackie Coogan earned making movies went directly to his mother and father, and later his mother and stepfather, and they were under absolutely no legal obligation to save any of it for him. And they didn't. In 1935, Jackie was 20 years old when his father and his best friend were killed in a car accident. Jackie was the only survivor. That tragedy was devastating on its own, but the financial reality that followed was almost equally crushing. When Jackie turned 21 and went to his mother's expecting access to the fortune he had earned as a child, she told him it was gone. She and his stepfather, who happened to also be his business manager, had spent nearly all of it on diamonds, furs, cars, on a lifestyle Jackie had funded without ever seeing a cent of it. His mother reportedly told him, and these were her actual words, every dollar a child earns belongs to his parents. She didn't even apologize. She saw nothing wrong with it because legally she was right. In 1938, Jackie Coogan sued his mother and stepfather to reclaim his earnings. It became one of the most publicized legal battles in Hollywood history. Charlie Chaplin, his old co-star, quietly gave Jackie $1,000 in cash to help him through the proceedings. The public was outraged on Jackie's behalf. The press covered it relentlessly. And when it was all over, after years of legal fees and battles, Jackie Coogan recovered only $126,000 of the roughly $4 million he had earned. That's what was left after his parents had gotten through with it. But something else came out of that lawsuit, something that mattered far beyond Jackie Coogan himself. The state of California was so disturbed by what happened that in 1939, they passed the California Child Actors Bill, known ever since as the Coogan Law. The law required that 15% of the child performer's earnings be placed in a protected trust that the parents cannot touch. It set limits on working hours. It required schooling. And it established basic protections for child entertainers that simply did not exist before. Jackie Coogan's story is the reason those protections exist today. Every child actor who's ever worked in Hollywood since 1939 has benefited from what he went through, and yet most people don't even know his name. Most people couldn't tell you what the Coogan Law is or where it came from. And the irony? Jackie Coogan went on to serve in World War II as a glider pilot, one of the most dangerous assignments in the military, flying unpowered aircraft into combat zones. He came home, rebuilt his career slowly, and eventually found a second wave of fame as Uncle Fester in the Addams Family in the 1960s. He died in 1984, having lived a full life, but he never recovered more than a fraction of what his parents took from him. After his story is the blueprint for understanding every child star exploitation story that came after, from Gary Coleman to Macaulay Culkin to the kids on Nickelodeon whose stories are only now starting to come out. And it started with Jackie Coogan. Vanilla Ice and Suge Knight, the balcony story. Okay, so if you grew up in the 90s or spent any time going down a hip-hop rabbit hole on the internet, you've probably heard of this story. Suge Knight, co-founder of Death Row Records, one of the most feared men in the music industry, allegedly showed up to Vanilla Ice's hotel room in the early 1990s, took him out onto the balcony on the 15th floor, and dangled him over the edge until Vanilla Ice agreed to sign over the publishing rights to Ice Ice Baby. That story has been told so many times it has become legend, and it paints a perfectly clear picture. Suge Knight as the ultimate music industry villain, Vanilla Ice as the naive pop star who got played in a briefcase full of publishing rights changing hands under the most extreme duress imaginable. There's just one problem. Vanilla Ice himself said that the dangling never happened. So what actually happened? So here's the real story as told by Vanilla Ice in multiple interviews over the years. In 1991, right after Ice Ice Baby exploded and became the first hip-hop single to hit #1 on the Billboard charts, Suge Knight showed up, unannounced, to the hotel room where Vanilla Ice was staying. He brought 5 armed men with him. They pushed past Vanilla Ice's bodyguards, and then Suge took Vanilla Ice out into the balcony, not to dangle him over the edge, but to have a private conversation about business. On that balcony, Suge presented Vanilla Ice with a legal document and made his position clear. He claimed that a man named Mario Chocolate Johnson, a friend and associate of Suge's, have been involved in writing Ice Ice Baby and deserve publishing credit and royalties. Vanilla Ice has consistently denied this, saying Johnson had nothing to do with the song, but the message from Suge was simple: sign the papers or things are going to get complicated. Vanilla Ice signed. He later said in an interview, "I signed them and I walked away alive." The rights were signed away were worth something between $3 to $4 million at the time. And Vanilla Ice has said publicly that the money Suge made from those royalties is what helped fund Death Row Records in its early days. The Chronic record, Tupac, Snoop Dogg, he claims that the money came from him. Now look, Vanilla Ice says there was no dangling. Suge Knight denies most of the story entirely. Mario Johnson says the whole meeting was peaceful and professional. Everyone's version is a little bit different, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And here's what everyone agrees on. Suge Knight showed up uninvited to a hotel room with multiple armed men. He got Vanilla Ice alone on the balcony on the 15th floor, and Vanilla Ice signed over millions of dollars in publishing rights that night and didn't go to the police. You tell me if that sounds like a normal business negotiation. What this story really is, regardless of whether anyone was dangled over the ledge, is the clearest possible example of how the music industry operates in the early days of hip-hop. Power, intimidation, and unsigned artists who had no idea what their music was worth or who to call when someone came to take it. Vanilla Ice was a pop star at the top of the world, and he still couldn't protect his own publishing. If that can happen to him, imagine what was happening to artists who were even more vulnerable. Suge Knight is currently serving a 28-year prison sentence for a 2015 hit and run that killed a man. The death row era is over, but the story of how that empire got funded in the first place, I think that's still worth talking about. And as for Vanilla Ice, look, the man had the last laugh whether people want to admit it or not. At the peak of his music fame in the 90s, while everyone was counting him out, he quietly became a licensed general contractor and even went to design school. He started flipping houses, building properties in Miami Beach, Manhattan, Los Angeles, and Utah, and by his own account, made millions doing it. He then turned that into a full reality TV show called The Vanilla Ice Project on a DIY network, where he and his crew renovated and remodeled homes in the Palm Beach County area of Florida. He still tours extensively to this day, performing a concert in festivals, and the nostalgia factor is real because fans still show up. The guy went from being the punchline of the entire music industry to being a legitimate businessman and TV personality. Turns out the ice never really melted, it just moved to real estate. Tim Donaghy, the NBA referee who bet on his own games. Tim Donaghy spent 13 seasons as an NBA referee. He worked 772 regular season games and 26 playoff games. By all accounts, he was considered a competent, experienced official, someone who had earned his place at the highest level of professional basketball. He had a wife, 4 daughters, a house in suburban Philadelphia, a normal life. He also had a gambling problem, and he was using his position as an NBA referee to make hundreds of thousands of dollars betting on the very games he was supposed to be officiating fairly. Donaghy's scheme started simply. He began sharing confidential information that only referees had access to, like which crews were officiating which games, what the relationships between specific referees and specific players look like, and other insider details that could have predicted how games would be called, with a childhood friend named James Batista, a professional gambler. Batista will take that information and place bets throughout the network of bookmakers. Donaghy got paid thousands of dollars for every correct pick, and the picks were extremely correct because Donaghy wasn't just passing information, he was also allegedly influencing the games he was officiating by making calls that would affect the point spread in his favor, not necessarily changing who won, but making sure the right team covered the spread. Between 2003 and 2007, Donaghy bet on games in every single season. Cell phone records show hundreds of calls between Donaghy, Batista, and a third man named Thomas Martino during the 2006 and 2007 seasons alone. The FBI had originally discovered the scheme not through looking at basketball at all, but through a separate organized crime investigation. Donaghy's name came up, and once it did, the whole thing unraveled fast. In July 2007, the story broke publicly. Commissioner David Stern called it the worst situation he had ever faced in his time running the NBA. And it was, because the integrity of professional basketball depends entirely on the assumption that the officials are neutral. The moment that assumption breaks down, every call and every game becomes a suspect. Every fan who ever yelled at their TV that the referee was cheating suddenly had a reason to wonder that they were actually right. Donaghy pled guilty to 2 federal charges, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and transmitting wagering information. He was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison. His wife filed for divorce immediately when the story broke. Batista and Martino also served prison time as well. Here's where the story gets a little bit more interesting. Donaghy has never stopped talking, and some of what he said since the conviction raises questions that have never been fully answered. He has claimed, and this is his version, take it with appropriate skepticism, that the NBA itself, under David Stern, pressured referees to make calls that benefited the league's business interests. Longer playoff series, bigger market advancing, more games, more money. He has recently said that an FBI agent texted him saying that the league cannot cover up the current gambling scandals the way they covered his up. Whether or not you believe Donaghy's accusations about the broader league, the fact that a man who bet on his own game and influenced calls is still out there making these claims, and the NBA has never successfully and completely refuted them, is a story that deserves more attention than it gets. And as someone who works with businesses often, I don't think what he's saying is too far-fetched. We've already heard of stories about big corporations breaking the law against their own gain. How can we be so sure that it's not happening here? And if you aren't aware of any big corporations and their wrongdoings, just check out my previous videos. I talk about them. Sports betting is now legal across the United States. The NBA has partnerships with sportsbooks, and Tim Donaghy is living proof that the line between officiating and corruption can be crossed by someone who has the trust to hold it. That's not ancient history, that's a warning. Shelly Miscavige, the woman who vanished. Michelle Miscavige, known to everyone as Shelly, was born in 1961 and grew up inside Scientology from the very beginning. Her parents were devoted members of the church. As a child, she spent time aboard L. Ron Hubbard's ship, the Apollo, working as part of the Commodore's messenger organization, a group of young girls who had personally attended to Hubbard. She joined the Sea Org, Scientology's most devoted internal organization, as a teenager. She eventually married David Miscavige, the man who had become the chairman of the boards of the Religious Technology Center and, effectively, the leader of Scientology after Hubbard's death in 1986. As his wife, Shelly was one of the most powerful people in the entire organization. Former members described her as sharp, capable, and deeply invested in the church's operations. She was involved in high-level decisions, and she had real authority. She was, by any measure, the First Lady of Scientology. Before we get into Shelly's disappearance, there's something that happened years earlier that's never sat right with a lot of people, and that is the death of Shelly's mother, Mary Florence Barnett. Mary was a longtime Scientologist who eventually resigned from the church, and when she left, she took copies of confidential upper-level church materials with her. She had also joined David Mayo's Advanced Ability Center, an independent Scientology splinter group that David Miscavige considered a direct threat to the church. On September 8, 1985, Mary Barnett was found dead at just 52 years old. Her body had 3 rifle shot rounds in her chest and 1 gunshot wound to the head. There were also slash marks on her wrists, which the autopsy noted may have been several days old at the time of her death. Her death was ruled consistent with unaliving herself. 3 shots to the chest and 1 to the head. Ruled as unaliving herself. Let that sink in. David Miscavige publicly called it a personal tragedy in his family's life, but according to witnesses who were present at the time, behind closed doors, his response was that she got what she deserved. A woman resigned from Scientology, walks out with confidential documents, and is found dead shortly after under circumstances that, by any reasonable standard, should be raised serious questions. And her own son-in-law's private reaction was that, "We are not here to make accusations, we're just here to present the facts, and the facts are deeply unsettling." On August 1st, 2007, Shelly Miscavige was escorted to her father's funeral. Her father, Maurice Barnett, had died the previous month. She attended, said goodbye to her father, and then left. That was the last time she was seen in public by anyone that we know of. It has now been 17 years. What happened to the lead up to her disappearance, according to multiple former Scientology members, is that Shelly fell out of favor with her husband David. The specific trigger, according to reports or former insiders, was that while David was away, Shelly made staffing changes to the church's organization chart and moved some of David's personal belongings. When he returned and discovered what she had done, he was reportedly furious, and shortly after, she was gone. In 2013, actress Leah Remini, a former high-ranking Scientologist who has since become one of the church's most prominent critics, filed a missing persons report for Shelly Miscavige with the Los Angeles Police Department. She had known Shelly personally and had become increasingly alarmed by her prolonged absence. The LAPD investigated, and then they closed the case. A detective stated that officers had personally made contact with Shelly and found her to be alive and safe. The case was classified as unfounded. And here's what the LAPD would not disclose: when they spoke to her, where she was, what was said, or any details whatsoever about the encounter. Shelly Miscavige has never appeared publicly to confirm she's okay. She has never given an interview. She has never been since to a Scientology event, even major ones she would normally have been expected to attend, like Tom Cruise's wedding to Katie Holmes in 2006. Former Scientology members, including people who worked inside the organization's highest levels, have pointed to a remote Church of Scientology property in Twin Peaks, California as a likely location. The property is one of the several high-security facilities the church maintains. Former members have described the place within the church's gold base in Gilman Hot Springs called The Hole, a facility where high-ranking members who fell out of favor were allegedly sent for punishment, confinement, and what other former members describe as humiliation and re-education. Whether Shelly is at any of those places, nobody outside the church can confirm. The church maintains she's simply living privately. The LAPD says they verify she is fine, and yet she has not been seen. Shelly Miscavige is a real person. She is the wife of the leader of one of the most powerful and litigious organizations in the world. She has not been seen publicly in 17 years, and for a long time, the conversation around her disappearance has been reduced mostly to a passing moment at an award show. At the 2023 Golden Globes, host Gerard Carmichael brought up Tom Cruise's return trophies and suggested they be exchanged for Shelly's safe return. Some people laugh, but if you watch that moment closely, it reads less like a punchline and more like someone using their platform big enough to say what a lot of people were thinking out loud. In a room full of Hollywood's most powerful people on live television, he said her name. He made sure people heard it too. Whether that was comedy or courage or both, it's up to you, but the result was the same. A brief moment, the whole world was reminded that Shelly Miscavige is still missing, and then the show moved on. Shelly Miscavige deserves more than just a passing moment. If she's fine and living privately by choice, then she has every right to do so. But the public has never been given any verifiable proof of that. No video, no statement, no appearance at all. Just the word of an organization with enormous financial and legal resources and a documented history of aggressive responses to anyone who challenges it. Her mother resigned from the church, took documents, and died under circumstances that were ruled as unaliving herself, but have never stopped raising questions. And now Shelly herself hasn't been seen in 17 years. This is a real, maybe missing woman, and no one talks about it. 5 scandals, 5 stories that got buried, minimized, turned into jokes, or simply forgotten by an industry that moves too fast and remembers too little. Rick James was celebrated while 2 women who survived what he did to them was barely mentioned in his obituaries. Jackie Coogan changed the law for every child actor who came after him, and most people couldn't tell you his name. Vanilla Ice lost millions to a shakedown that the industry shrugged at because it was hip-hop and that's how it works. Donaghy corrupted the integrity of a professional basketball, and the league did its best to contain the damage and move on. And Shelly Miscavige has been missing from public life for 17 years, and the most famous mention of it was a joke at an award show. These stories matter, the people in them matter as well, and the fact that the entertainment industry is very good at making us forget things that are inconvenient is something we should all be paying attention to. Because the next time something like this happens, and there will be a next time, the question is whether we let it get buried again, or whether we keep asking questions until someone has to answer them. And that's a wrap, folks, on today's Deep Cut. Every story you just heard, documented, verified, and real. And that's what we do here. We go past the surface, past the headlines, past what they wanted you to know, and find what's actually there. If this video gave you something to think about, something to talk about, made you want to send it to somebody who needs to see it, hit that subscribe button, because we drop a new Deep Cut video every Sunday, and trust me, you don't want to know or miss what's coming next. Drop a comment and let us know which story hit you the hardest. Which one are you still thinking about? Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Deep Cut Stories, where the truth runs deeper than the headlines. And remember, every story has a deeper cut. We'll see you next Sunday.